Moving on to Assemblymember Perez Bill AB 1176. Witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition. Finance.
Department of Finance is opposed to this bill as well for the same reasons of getting ahead of those GGRF and cap and trade budget discussions.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we'll move this item to suspense file. Moving on to file item 1390, Assemblymember Alejo's item. Witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition. Finance.
No file.
No file. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to AB 516. Witnesses in support. Mr. Lovell.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. John Lovell on behalf of the California Police Chiefs Association and on behalf of the California Public Parking Association, both in support of this bill.
Additional witnesses in support.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Matt Robinson on behalf of the Solano Transportation Authority, the San Mateo County Transit District, Caltrain, and the San Mateo City County Association of Governments, all in support.
Mr. Chairman, members, Bob Naylor, representing the Orange County toll roads. This will save us about $4 million a year in lost tolls. We support.
Witnesses in opposition. Welcome. Go ahead. Mr. Lovell, can we make room for the opposition,
Sure.
please?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Spacing it out.
Chairman Larara and members, I'm Rosemary Shahan. I'm President of Consumers for Auto Reliability and Safety. And we're in agreement with the author of the intent of the bill to be able to identify vehicles that are sold. We think that that's only rational. Of course, we should be able to identify them for a number of purposes, including public safety and tolls and so on. Our concern is with the unintended consequences that happen when we build on what we already have, which is an existing system that's very irrational, where consumers are paying to have the dealers handle the license and registration, but there's no requirement that the dealer has to actually get you the permanent plates within the 90 days. And so there are some penalties that start kicking in at the end of the 90 days that are arbitrary. You're required to put on the plates as soon as you get them or within 90 days. But what happens if you don't get them? And there are circumstances where dealers go out of business and they don't submit the paperwork to the DMV, or the DMV has backlogs. There are a lot of reasons why. There are circumstances beyond people's control where they're not getting their permanent plates in time. And we appreciate that the author amended the bill to get it out of public safety with an amendment, but it doesn't address the problem of people getting ticketed over and over again, then their car gets impounded. And then they can't get it out of impound because they're not the registered owner. So even if you pay all the tickets and the impound fees, you still can't get your car if you're not the registered owner. And the form that's contemplated by the amendment, you know, the San Francisco Chronicle wrote an editorial, came out this morning saying license plate bill needs a fix, that the amendment taken to get out of public safety is not sufficient. And we appreciate, we would appreciate more time to work with the author and his staff and other groups with the same concerns from the civil rights community, from consumer groups, that people shouldn't even be pulled over. Because for a lot of people, just being pulled over is very intimidating. You know, things can happen when people get pulled over. They shouldn't be pulled over because the dealer or DMV messed up.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in opposition.
Thank you. Jessica Bartholow with the Western Center on Law and Poverty. We actually have no position so far. I just wanted to thank the author for taking our time to talk about this issue that Rosemary brought up, and hope that we can work that out. It is, we believe that it would not only reduce the burden on mostly low-income people and people of color who are in communities that don't have a DMV location or it's difficult to go in, but it would also reduce the burden on DMV if people aren't required to go there when they haven't broken the law. So this is the amendment that we're looking for, and we really appreciate working with the author and hope that we can make that change before it comes out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Noé Paramo, representing California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation, concur with the comments just said, oppose unless amended, and look forward to working to try to get this resolved to the best of our constituents. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in opposition. Seeing none, Finance.
The Department of Finance is opposed to this bill because we believe it adds new costs for consumers that are more appropriately borne by the dealers or the toll operators who are the parties who stand to benefit from the legislation.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we will move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to Mr. Bonta's items, AB 533. Witnesses in support. Witnesses in support? Come on down.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. Tam Ma with Health Access California. We're proud to be the sponsors and supporters of AB 533. We believe this bill will protect consumers who unwittingly end up getting treated by an out-of-network provider when they go to an in-network facility for care and treatment. The costs for this bill are fee-supported special funds, and there's no general fund impact for this bill. And we urge your support of this bill and hope it comes off a suspense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair and members, Autumn Ogden with American Cancer Society, Cancer Action Network, also in support of this measure for reasons stated.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition? Finance, you're in opposition?
No, I'm in support.
Oh, go ahead.
On behalf of 3 million members of AARP, we're in support of this bill.
Great, thank you. Witnesses in opposition? Finance.
We don't have a position on this bill. The cost would depend on the number of independent resolution process claims that end up going through. As a point of reference, the Department of Managed Healthcare, if they were to receive 500 additional claims annually, they would incur costs of $1.9 million and require approximately 14 positions in 2015-16 to accomplish that workload. The Department of Insurance expects costs of approximately $500,000 in 15-16, $1 million in 16-17, and $900,000 ongoing for insurer compliance, establishment of the process, and to promulgate the regs needed.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing or hearing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to Senator Bonta's AB 1140. Witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition. Finance.
Department of Finance is neutral on this bill because it modernizes the program by addressing emerging issues in victim compensation and clarifies and streamlines the governing statutes.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to AB 573, Senator Medina. Witnesses in support. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Lauer, members of the committee. Jessica Barthel with the Western Center on Law and Poverty in support of this measure. Just as a reminder that legal services organizations throughout the state have lost a lot of funding and federal funds throughout the last several years. We're really struggling to provide support to an increasing number of low-income Californians seeking aid. We're already receiving those families that are hurt by the closures of the colleges because they have evictions. They're seeking public benefit. They're unable to meet their basic needs. We already have them in our offices. This funding would just simply allow us to be able to serve them with assistance to regain the years that they've lost in seeking an education that they cannot achieve because the college closed, and overcoming their financial burden as a result. Thank you.
Noé Paramo, representing California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation, in support. This measure will assist the students who have been impacted by what's going on with the schools, and we want to see that the services that they need to really address any concerns they may have so they can continue on with the fruitful lives. Thank you.
Comments or questions from committee? Finance.
We understand that this bill is actively a work in progress, and the administration has certainly been engaged, and we're not prepared to take a position yet, as we understand there are amendments coming.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we move this item to suspense file. Moving on to AB 678 by Senator O'Donnell. Witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition? Finance?
Department of Finance would classify this among the bills that we have a concern about getting ahead of the budget. We haven't taken a formal position on this one, but this would also be ahead of the cap and trade discussions.
Yes, thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to Assemblymember Ridley Thomas, AB 8. Oh, sorry, missed one. I'm getting hungry. AB 693, Assemblymember Eggman. Witnesses in support?
Christian Molina on behalf of Sierra Club, California, in strong support.
Thank you. Witnesses in opposition? Finance?
We don't have a position. The PUC estimates that implementing the program will require $560,000 from the Public Utilities Commission's Utilities Reimbursement Account and 2.5 permanent positions. As always, any request for resources would be evaluated during the budget process.
Thank you. Questions or comments from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we'll move this item to the suspense file. Moving on now to AB 808, Assemblymember Ridley Thomas. Witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition? Finance?
The Department of Finance supports this bill because statewide standards for pricing alternative motor fuel will be needed as alternative fuel options become more prevalent. Additionally, we believe it furthers the intent of Executive Order B16, 2012.
Thank you. Questions or comments from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to Assemblymember Roger Hernandez, AB 853. Witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition? Finance?
We don't have a position. According to the PUC, the bill would require $208,000 from the reimbursement account and 0.75 positions for 1 year to conduct hearings, including public comment, and then issue a written decision determining whether the electrical corporation or gas corporation will be authorized to outsource the described work.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to AB 854 by Assemblywoman Weber. Witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition? Finance?
No file.
No file. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to AB 965 by Assemblymember Eduardo Garcia. Witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition? Finance?
We think costs to both departments would be minor and absorbable.
Thank you. Questions or comments from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to Assemblymember Tony Thurman's AB 1025. Witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition? Finance?
No file.
No file. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to Speaker Atkins' AB 1071. Witnesses in support?
Christian Molina on behalf of Sierra Club, California, in support.
Thank you. Witnesses in opposition? Finance?
We don't have a position on this bill. All of the Cal EPA entities affected by the bill would have minor and absorbable costs in their state operations. However, the bill could result in a possible redirection of penalty revenue directly to the supplemental environmental projects and away from other high priority activities.
Questions or comments from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to Assemblymember Ting's AB 1110. Witnesses in support?
Christian Molina on behalf of Sierra Club, California, in strong support.
Sierra Club's working today. Love it. Witnesses in opposition? Finance?
The Energy Commission estimates the bill would require $130,000 from the Energy Resources Program account and 1 position to facilitate discussions pertaining to implementing the bill's requirements in a future rulemaking, host workshops, verify the greenhouse gas emissions reporting, and increase review of power content label information provided by utilities. According to the ARB, any workload for them would be absorbable.
Thank you. Questions or comments from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to Assemblymember Gray's AB 1142. Witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition? Finance?
No file.
No file. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to Assemblymember DeBobne's items, AB 1198. Witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition. Finance.
So this bill doesn't appropriate any funding to the program, but the author's office anticipates future funds would be provided by Prop 98 General Fund. With nearly 1,200 California charter schools, we believe that this bill creates Prop 98 General Fund cost pressure that could cost hundreds of millions of dollars to create and fund the program.
Thank you. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing or hearing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to AB 1326. Mr. DeBobne. Witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition. Finance.
No file.
No file. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to Assemblymember Bloom, AB 1330. Witnesses in support.
Christian Molina on behalf of Sierra Club, California, in strong support.
Witnesses in opposition. Finance.
No file.
Comments or questions from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to AB 1347, Assemblymember Chu. Witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition. Finance.
According to the Department of General Services, the bill would not have a direct fiscal impact on DGS to implement. However, in general, any changes to the state's current contracting practices could result in additional costs to the state. The bill establishes an additional resolution process for disputes between contractors and local entities for their public works contracts, and we believe that that would be potentially a reimbursable state mandate.
Thank you. Questions or comments from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Moving on to AB 1420, Assemblymember Salas. Witnesses in support.
Christian Molina on behalf of Sierra Club, California, in strong support.
Witnesses in opposition. Finance.
No file.
Questions or comments from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Our last item for today, members, is AB 1461 by Assemblywoman Gonzalez. Witnesses in support.
Christian Molina from Sierra Club, California, in support.
Witnesses in opposition. Finance.
No file.
No file. Comments or questions from committee? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, we move this item to the suspense file. Members, this concludes our meeting for today. We will be very popular on Thursday, and we had lots of work to do between now and Thursday. So thank you, members, for joining us today. This concludes our meeting.